wear questionably tight jeans, listen to music like My Chemical Romance, All Time Low, Pierce the Veil, are an explosion of emotions, constantly find yourself telling your legal guardians it's not a phase and slamming your bedroom door, then you, my friend, are probably an emo. But if you find yourself looking like a sickly Victorian child, you're best friends with Edgar Allan Poe's ghost, and you listen to like whimsical, ghostly music that sounds like this. That's a terrible example of gothcore music. But yes, if you look like a Tim Burton character, love dressing up in this theatrical, Rocky Horror Show-esque style, and find yourself vaguely relating to punks in some type of way, then you, my friend, are probably a goth. Hope that terrible description clears that up for you. Hello, yes, my name is Cowardice Life, and on this channel we do video essays poorly, and then we all talk about it in the comment section. It's pretty fun, it's pretty cool, and a lot of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed, so if this sounds like fun for you, please feel free to subscribe. That'd be neat, that'd be cool. We're trying to build a community here. And if you're not new here, it's me again, Cowardice Life, and boy do I have the most exciting news in the world for you. My hoodies, my drawings of digressions that I've been doing for weeks. If you've been following this channel, basically I've been trying to draw out digression, and we finally did it. It's finally here. I finally have it in apparel form. It's going on sale today. That's right, these lovely heavyweight hoodies that are made in the UK with recycled cotton, be shipped in recyclable packaging all over the world, wherever you are, worldwide shipping, are available. These hoodies have generally been like an absolute labor of love to make. It's been so amazing and validating to like encapsulate my thoughts and feelings of digression into an image. You know, the things that I do oh so much in video essays. And I'm so happy and proud that it is available to the public, all thanks to Josh and Separate Collection for making the hoodie for me. So the link will be here if you want to learn more about the product, or even buy it if you feel like it, but there's no pressure at all. But anyways, we do digress. Let's get onto the video essay of Goths and how it's been affected by social media. Goths were like born out of the shadows of the 1970s, early 1980s. You know, the goth movement emerged as this distinctive sub-movement within the broader scene of like post-punk and underground art. But we can go back even further than this, because the term goth actually has a lot of history attached to it. Goth originally refers to this like German faction that actually played a pretty large role in like taking down the Western Roman Empire back in the day. And then from there, the term quickly became associated with this type of architecture. You know, something you can imagine a 6 billion year old vampire living in. Not to be confused with my live action roleplay character, a 6,000 year old wizard. He kind of lives in like an ice cave. Anyway, that's a story for another day. But goth is also a term attached to literature. Think books like Frankenstein, Dracula, you know, books known for being dark, atmospheric themes and melodramatic storytelling. There's also gothic poets like Edgar Allan Poe. The raven doth cry. I only know Edgar Allan Poe well prior to researching for this video, because there was this meme on the internet where the raven comes in to Edgar Allan Poe's house. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And it walks in on Edgar doing something inappropriate, and the crow's like, never mind. But it wasn't really till the 20th century that the word goth took on a new meaning. One that was synonymous with like this dark fashion, this like eerie, reverby. I still don't know how to describe goth music very well. I'm trying to think in my word bank how to describe it, but like this spooky cool music and like aesthetic. You know, goths embrace this really cool, like amazing style characterized by like incredible makeup style, almost like Victorian aspired attire, which, you know, like draws like heavy inspiration from gothic literature and like the romantic movement. Honestly, it's just such a cool vibe, and like hats off to people that have the energy to, you know, dress up like in this aesthetic every day. It's so cool. We're like literally a walking art piece at that point, and I've got so much like admiration for you to put that much time and effort into your aesthetic. But I also do feel like in my introduction to the goth movement and what goth is about, I should also try and give a good definition of how it's different to the emo movement, because I do feel like in modern day times on like social media, people only see like the stereotypical versions of these subcultures, and they kind of get them mixed up a lot. And you know, admittedly, both subcultures do share a lot of similarities, such as an affinity for like dark clothing and an expression of emotion. They do actually have really distinct origins, aesthetics, and musical influences. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, Goths are heavily associated with the post-punk movement in the late 1970s, early 1980s. You know, with bands like Bauhaus, Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, despite the lead singer saying they're not actually goth, which is very goth. These are all bands that give you a very good idea for the sound of goth. Like the sound of music, but goth. I don't know why that means goth to me, but it does. Conversely, emos like Immersion got really big in the early 2000s as like a sub-movement from the punk rock scene. And you know, they're very characterized by their emotional and introspective theme. Think OG My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, and Pierce the Veil. I myself was an emo. Let's go! What a good time. It wasn't. I was a sad little boy, but this is not about me. This is about Goths and what's happened to them in recent time. And I think what's really been interesting me about Goths is there's this conversation online between, you know, Goths of all ages of what it means to be goth. You know, there's conversations being had being like, if you don't listen to the music, you're not a goth, where some people are saying you don't have to listen to the music, but if you understand the literature and stuff and read all that sort of stuff, you are still a goth. And then some people are like, no, I just want to dress up like this. I don't really like the music. I'm more of a Taylor Swift kind of guy. And it's creating such an interesting argument over like nuance of what it means to be a goth. And that fascinates me. And I just really want to dive into this hot pot of conversation because you know I just love conversation. But I also really do want to highlight some of the struggles I think goths have faced in recent times with social media. Before I do that, let me paint you a picture of the current goth scene on TikTok and some of the conversations that are being had so we're all on an equal playing field for what's going on for the goth side of TikTok. I feel there's always like the misconception that like these movements are just not as big as they were back in the day, and maybe there are arguments for that, but no, just by looking at content creators like that, if you just type in goth, you're flooded with lots of amazing people that are expressing themselves in this way that looks very gothy to me, you know. At face value, I'm like, yeah, that's definitely a goth. And there are lots of videos like this where it's like goths trying to help baby bats, which is a term goths gave to new people trying to get into the goth movement that are, you know, experimenting with it all for the first time and learning about it. And it's actually quite a wholesome, you know, comment section of, you know, like young people coming to ask questions and, you know, elder goths or just goths that are more knowledgeable on the subject, just giving their insights. And it's really quite wholesome and sweet. But there is that bit of it being like, it's all about the music. But then conversely, there's this content creator who did a video on YouTube about the goth movement who said themselves that like, they don't really mess with the music, but they really like the literature. And they seem pretty goth to me also. And they're very knowledgeable on the subject. So this is where this interesting conversation occurs of like, what makes someone goth? And there's lots of videos arguing over stuff like this content creator.
This is a work of art. This is a work of art. This is a work of art. But this is bullshit.
At first you think they're being helpful, but then they're like, no, if you don't mess with the music, you're not a real goth. And I do kind of understand why they would say that, because it is a movement so strongly connected to its sound that if you don't like that sound, it does seem a bit like, And people have given really interesting points in their comment section being like, it's okay if you like goth fashion and not the music, but you aren't considered goth. You just dress in a gothic style, which is maybe an interesting point to be had and to be discussed maybe later on about, you know, authenticity. Maybe it's gothic, but it doesn't make you a goth because you're not actively in the scene listening to the music. And then within this discussion, there's also videos like this.
I love goth and alt fashion, but don't listen to the music. Is that the formula for being a poser? Yeah, like pretty much exactly. But you know what? I think that shit's okay. I don't fucking care about that.
And that raises the point of like, yeah, is it that deep to be a poser? I would understand why there was more complications to this kind of conversation in like the punk movement when it really clearly stood for like the do-it-yourself, anti-establishment, anti-corporation movement. I understand that. But the goth movement doesn't seem to put as much importance on that ethos and more on the sound and the music, which is totally okay. I'm neither goth nor punk. I'm just a human that loves looking into things and talking about things with people. But then to go against that in this conversation of nuance, which I just find so fascinating, there's content creators like this that have videos being like, remember that goth has branched out from the punk. We share similar ideologies like anarchism, non-conformism, anti-capitalism, and anti-consumerism, which is so interesting because goth is such a commercialized aesthetic now. And yeah, like the top comment on this video is, and I see a bunch of goths buying from Amazon, Shein, and H&M, etc. And this is tough because in recent years, that aesthetic has become very trendy. It's one of the cool aesthetics to have currently. But this is why I find this topic so exciting for a video essay, because there's so much to be discussed. And because it's been so like popularized and like consumerized that you can just go buy it in all your local shops and it's got seen as like the cool look, you get content like this and lots of people making content around it, being like, everybody wants a goth GF until it's 3 a.m. and they're keeping you awake because their head is being mean. You know, there's lots of content flooding the internet of being like, I want a goth baddie, I want a goth girlfriend, I just want a goth girlfriend. And that's nothing to do with this content creator, by the way. I'm not saying anything about them. This was just the first one that came up when I typed in goth girlfriend meme, and yeah. But this does bring me on to my first point about like the goth movement and kind of what's happened to it in recent times, which is like the over-sexualization of goth women. And I think this issue kind of arises because like to the untrained eye, or to like the normie or the normal person, the average Joe, the regular Sal, just the normal human, if they see like the dark makeup, the dark hair, and like almost that like vaguely theatrical look or whatever, they just call it goth. It might not be a goth, it might be an emo, it might be an e-girl, an e-boy, it might be any one of these things, but people just call it goth, and they're like, yeah, I like that. And in recent times on social media, this portrayal of goth, regardless of whether it is or isn't goth, and 99% of the time it isn't goth, by the way, it's just like ego. Anyway, it's become like so fetishized and so like hypersexualized. It's perpetuated like this toxic stereotype that goth girlfriends are like this incredible thing that you must fall at your feet for. And it's just a bit grimy, really. Like, I could give loads of anecdotal stories of like my girls who are friends who are alternative, and they're not even goth, but they're just labeled as goth because they're like heavily tattooed and wear like slightly theatrical makeup, and men say so many creepy, heinous things to them, and it's always those freaking men in suits that are just so square and bots, and they're like, yeah, I want an alternative bad goth girl baddie. Shut up, Derek from accounting. Morality sword. Not that I would ever do any harm to anyone. I'm really a very passive human. It's just creepy. But because like it's become this like almost meme online, where it's just like, I want goth GF, make pain go away. Because of all this just like horrificness, social media and pop culture has really perpetuated this horrific stereotype for goth femme presenting people, and it's really shitty. And I think what made it worse is so many content creators realized they could like secure the bag from this, so quickly just dressed up as a goth girl when they were actually just an ego, and they were like, yeah, I'm so goth GF, I'm your goth GF. Yeah. And it further just keeps adding to this horrific negative stereotype. When, like, imagine how horrific that must be. You find an aesthetic that really resonates with you. And, you know, that's, I think, very important for young people, the self-exploration of identity. And, you know, you just find this identity that really resonates with you. You feel comfortable. You're like, yeah, I like this goth look, and I'm having a great time. I love the music. I love the literature. Whatever you need the T's and C's to be a goth. But say they just do it all. And then, like, they go out and they're trying to have a nice time, and they just get over-sexualized by, like, just creepy dudes and stuff, or whoever it may be. Just creeps in general. That must be just heartbreaking, because it feels good to you, because it feels like a safe place to you, and then that safe place is being sexualized and ruined, and I fucking hate that. Keep your gross thoughts to yourself. Get a grip. If you're like a grown man and you're being like, I want goth GF, get up off the fucking floor, get a grip, get a job, and be a normal integrated man of society. Jesus Christ. And that's coming from me, a bedroom dweller with lots of plushies. Get a fucking grip. Stop over-sexualizing people. And this is not me being like, pick me, choose me. Dear God, no. It's just really odd that it's so normalized. And the whole thing just really undermines goth movement's values of like self-expression and empowerment. It just takes this cool thing, which is the goth movement, and just... Not only are they getting commercialized to heck, so like annoying TikTok influencers can renegade with a bit of gothic makeup on, they've also got to deal with like just freaks over-sexualizing them. What a horrific place to be. And I think that could be its own video essay in general, just like the over-sexualization of them presenting alt people in general. It's freaking just garbage out there for you lot. And I think all these things start because at face value they think it's silly and funny, like, I want goth GF, it's just harmless, you know. But like, I think slowly but surely it really does just add to like the over-sexualization of people, because you'll see it on people's dating profiles and they'll be like, no, I'm joking, but they'll be like, I want goth GF. Or you'll just have like some gym bro meathead on gym cell TikTok being like, goth GF please, that's all I need. That whole thing just makes me feel icky. And I'm not even a goth GF. Like, I can't be. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble that wants me to be their goth GF. That just can't be me in this lifetime. Maybe the next one. But anyways, I don't know why we're even thinking about that. But I think that really does lead me on to my next point of like mainstream appropriation and misrepresentation of goths, actual goths in the goth community, and not just e-girls and emos and all these other sub-faction movements, you know, in this giant game of Age of Empires that aren't actually goths, and how it's all just being misrepresented, and it's oh so messy. I think one of the big challenges that goths face in the modern world with like apps like TikTok is like how TikTok's algorithm-driven content suggestions may like prioritize sensationalized or like caricature versions of goths, because they know those are the ones that are going to get like the most obvious interactions, because when you think of goth, it's that type of person in your head, whether that actually be an authentic goth or not. But sometimes the average person might just be like, oh, bit of dark makeup, some dark clothes, a bit spooky looking, that's a goth. Is it, Graham? Is it really a goth? Or like conversely, on the other hand, it might be like people that can afford all like the theatrical makeup and all like the aesthetic, which isn't cheap, you know, which I suppose leads to why TikToks like this, you know, do turn up, because people are like, well, if you don't look like this, you're not really a goth. But, you know, this person might be like 35 and have all these other financial commitments, maybe listening to all the OG goth bands, but this randomer on the internet says you're not a goth because you don't have big hair and big makeup and you don't dress like a sickly Victorian child. What a dilemma. That must just be so annoying. Like, you know in yourself you are an actual goth. You're about it. You were in the scene in the OG days, but some randomer on the internet will be like, actually, I don't think you're a goth. But this like raises the broader point of like, because of the way social media works and it's like that instant engagement, you just need that bang, 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 bang. You need the thing that is most visually pleasing, because it is TikTok. So they do need these characterized versions, because they're the ones that people are going to be like, whoa, that's so interesting, or they're just going to feed off of it, right? Because it is eye-catching. So if you see someone that isn't dressed up that day, but, you know, they might be talking about the goth movement in their video, you know, the only people that are going to listen to that or take interest in that are people that are actually probably in the goth scene themselves, ones that are interested in that subject. Whereas, like, if you see, like, someone all dressed up in the goth aesthetic and they're not really saying anything about the goth movement, but they're just singing or dancing or miming a song, you might stay around because you're like, oh, that's so interesting. What is that human? That's goth. So then, like, the actual goths, or I'm not saying that person isn't a goth, but people that are goths, they just don't present as heavily as, like, the stereotype of a goth. Be like, oh, that's not fair because I'm also a goth, but that's also just a crushing problem of having to be social media ready at all times. It's a dilemma. Somebody phone Nelly. That's a great joke, because in Nelly's discography there's a song called Dilemma. That's one of my favourite jokes. Sorry for ending that point with a joke. But all of this, I think, does create this really interesting conversation, and that's why those TikToks I showed earlier are occurring and these conversations are happening. What does it mean to be a goth in the present day world? Can you just enjoy the aesthetic? Or is that just being gothic in style? You know, do you have to listen to the bands? Or, you know, as that content creator said on YouTube, can you just really appreciate the aesthetic and also know the history of goth? You know, you really enjoy the literature, and that in itself makes you gothic. It's such an interesting one. It really is, isn't it? I suppose like die-hard enthusiasts would be like, no, you have to have listened to the music. You know, you have to enjoy the music. You have to be part of that scene, because if not, you're a poser. But the person that made the argument about really enjoying the literacy also really makes sense in my head as well, because, you know, if that's gothic as well, and that was also given the term goth before, you know, the goth movement, I think in its own way it's goth too. Nuance is so interesting, and just like labels in general fascinate me, because at what point on the scale is it the tipping point of you're a poser or are you goth, or is it you just have to say you can name 5 Cure songs or something? But I really do empathize with actual goths, whatever that means, because like it must be, you know, draining seeing people just buy like fast fashion gothic looking things and being like, yeah, I'm goth now, because as mentioned, you know, goth is from the punk movement. It's like a section off from that, and the punk movement was very much ingrained in the do-it-yourself culture. And if people are just like buying these loadouts like it's costumes, I understand why some of the OG members of the goth community would get, you know, angry about that or have some feelings towards that aren't particularly pleasant, and that's why words like poser get thrown around, and that in itself is also a very tough conversation. And that's probably like words why like baby bat got created, like people that are new to the goth scene that are finding their feet in it and they're exploring themselves through, you know, identity and aesthetics and how they present to society, which I think kind of brings me on to my next point, which is the commodification and consumerization of the goth aesthetic. You know, TikTok has this real emphasis on visual content, and you know, with trends like e-girls and e-boys becoming very popular, and to, you know, like a normie or a normal person that isn't too in the alt scene in general, when they just see someone that dons like this slightly emo-y, gothy looking makeup, they'll be like, yeah, goth. I think all of that contributes to like the consumerization of the goth movement. Goth inspired makeup and fashion trends have become increasingly popular on TikTok, and because of that you'll then get like high street stores selling gothy clothing, and like it's kind of funny because these stores are selling clothes to people that looked nothing like goths, you know, a summer ago, but now that it's trendy, it's like now everybody looks like that. And that's a sticky one, really, and that has a whole melting pot of things to dissect, because that in itself is so divorced and so separated from the actual goth sub-movement, right? There is no culture and history there. It's just fast fashion made in sweatshops, which isn't great, especially for a movement that's so linked to like the do-it-yourself culture. That's not do-it-yourself at all, is it? That's get someone in a factory to do it for you. I think because of these gothic-inspired, you know, fashion styles becoming the trend, teamed with like the I want the goth GF, it's just been like this horrible time for goths where they're just so incredibly over-sexualized, and it doesn't help that you've got content creators trying to profit off that, being like, yeah, I'm your goth GF, because it further perpetuates that idea. And they're not really a goth, they just look like a freaking ego. They just look like if Creepy Old Man Incorporated was like, what's a goth again? Yeah, maybe some heavy eye makeup and some big hair that's, you know, box dyed. That's not me coming for people that box dye their hair, by the way. It's a perfectly good way to dye your hair. You know, due to like capitalism and companies always trying to profit off things, it's taking goth's aesthetic and making it palatable to the masses, and doing so kind of takes away of the meaning of being goth and what it actually means to be part of that community. And this is why people are butting heads in the community, because you've got people coming into it just dressing up like a stereotypical goth, being like, no, I'm goth, and it's like, no, you're TikTok goth. Or does that make you actual goth if you dress like goth? And then who can actually give a definite answer on that? I know purists would say, no, you have to listen to the OG music, but then really doesn't seem like goth is as inherently heavily linked to the punk ideologies as, you know, punk is. I know it's a sub-movement from punk, so I guess you wouldn't really expect it to as much. From what I'm seeing online, a lot of the content creators, the big goth content creators on TikTok, aren't really pushing the ideologies of punk, like anarchy and anti-capitalist and all of that stuff. It seems like there's a lot of pressure put on how goths look, and that seems to be a big factor in the goth community. And I think that kind of brings me on to my next point, and I kind of just want to quickly interject. My camera corrupted like halfway through filming this video essay, so now I'm having to refilm most of this essay again, so I'm kind of overwhelmed and my brain's slightly fried, but I'm going to kind of do my best to relay the points that I've already made, but it'll feel a bit weird to me. But yes, anyway, back into the video essay. Next point, which is gatekeeping and authenticity, which kind of links onto my previous point. You know, because the goth aesthetic has been taken and absolutely squeezed for money for like TikTok's gains, for big companies' gains, for people trying to profit off the look by jumping on the memes like, I want goth girlfriend. There's a good question of, are you gatekeeping because you're actually trying to keep the movement real and actually something of substance, or are you just gatekeeping because you're cringe and you have no depth, and so because of that you kind of keep this thing to yourself, so it gives you this one thing you have over people, like I do with tattoos and the gym. I have no other personality, so I have to have tattoos in the gym. I don't even know why I'm saying that. I don't agree with that. I think I'm a pretty cool guy. Once again, I'm feeling quite flustered. But I think like the TikTokification of the goth movement has really sparked debate in the goth community, and it's really showing the tensions between like the newcomers, so like the baby bats, and like the OG goths that were like, I was there when Susie and the Banshees were just actually Susie and the Gals and they weren't even dead yet. I'm 6 billion years old. I'm actually Frankenstein. You know, all of these things. And the baby bats are just like, well, I like this because I'm young and I'm still exploring self-expression. And when you're young, you like to try out loads of different aesthetics to find one that resonates with you. Can't we all just live in happiness? And then the 6 billion year old OG goth, I'm Edgar Allan Poe reincarnated. Gah, no you can't. The raven doth cry. And the baby bats would be like, fly away. This is my anime about goths. But they're not actually bats, they're humans. This is just a term coined for young people or just new people getting into the goth movement. where am I going with that? But I think because goth is this thing that is so heavily linked to its music and its aesthetic, like these two poignant, important things about it, the question of what officially makes someone goth is kind of impossible to answer, indefinite. Like I said earlier, it's like these scales. At what point do they tip in favour of goth or poser, you know? Because if you argue, you know, it's you have to look a certain way, that's kind of not fair, because not everyone can afford to, you know, have all these grand outfits, or to, you know, afford to do the makeup every day. You know, it's not fair. Not everyone can afford to do that. That's why, you know, sometimes people that are in these movements do have to opt for getting things from their local shops because perhaps they're cheaper. And obviously, in the long run, you'd hope that maybe they could save up to get the more expensive things that aren't, you know, fast fashion. Because, you know, the goth movement is linked to the punk movement, and they would be like, fast fashion, not good. But, you know, you understand that not everyone can just get in at that level. It's so tough. And to give a concrete answer of what is goth and what isn't goth would be completely wrong of me. This is more of a question that we can all talk about together, right? And conversely, people that are like, well, you don't look goth. Well, like an adult that has a full-time job and, you know, other life commitments probably doesn't have the time or energy to, you know, want to dress up so theatrically all day and every day. And also, I found like when I was an emo when I was younger, I loved it. I had the hair and I loved this dress up, because when you're young, you don't have lots of different things in your life. You know, you don't have a full-time job, you don't have all these family commitments or life commitments or everything. You know, you've got school, your friends, and then like how you dress is a very big part of your self-exploration. And that's not me dogging on young people. I think it's amazing when you're young, you do have this big time and space to, you know, explore how you want to express yourself to the world, and that's so fun, and it's such an interesting journey. But I think when young goths or baby bats, whatever you want to call them, come for older goths being like, well, you don't look goth, it's like, wait till you're in your late 20s and you have a career. You're probably so drained from being destroyed by working all day for a mean little man with a clip-on tie and a rub-on tan. He's got me running around the office like a dog around a trap, but when I get right home, you're always there to rub my back. Hey, Julie, look what they're doing to me. That's a great song, but you get what I mean. Like, life is very overstimulating. I don't know if that's just through my lens, but it really crushes you down. So, you know, I don't always want to dress up. Not that I'm a goth, I'm really not. But, you know, I don't always want to put on these crazy fits. I just want to put on my comfies, which is like my hoodies and my parachute pants. When you've got all these different things going on, you choose where you allocate your energy to. And I just don't think dressing up crazy or dressing up big is where you put a lot of your energy to. I think your totality comes from lots of other aspects in your life, which is just like managing life, trying to pay bills, trying to pay rent. And like broadly speaking, I do think gatekeeping is not good. You shouldn't lock people out from joining your communities, because that's how you keep communities going, is through new people joining in, new people getting interested by it. And if they just get interested in it on like a surface level because they think the vibe looks cool, you know, they think the aesthetics is sick, and then they get in it through that, I don't think you should be like, hey, no, you can't have the cool Victorian ghostly sickly outfit until you can listen to Cure and sing their songs backwards and you actually make the banshees alive again. You know, you shouldn't put all these laws on people, because I don't think that's good for preservation of these movements and such. But I do think gatekeeping, or like at least holding people semi-accountable, is a good thing to do. You know, like if someone's getting a lot of traction from just dressing up like a goth and they're just like, yeah, I'm a goth, I live and breathe this, and they're just complete form over substance, and by that I mean they look like it but they don't really do anything with it, then I guess you could be like, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right. Obviously don't bully, but just have conversation with them and be like, are you just doing this for clicks and engagement, or do you actually like know about the gothic movement? I guess maybe that's a conversation to be had. But that's always such a tough one to have with young minds, because you never want to stamp on self-expression, because I think the young soul is such a vulnerable one. It just wants this bigger purpose. You know, I can remember being young and just really wanting something to belong to. And that's why I was an emo, and I think a lot of my friends were emos, because we were, you know, not to be like a cliche Netflix movie, but we were the misfits. We were just the kids that didn't fit in. So we fit in this like place for outcasts, and it was a nice community, kind of. Not really, but at least it gave me something. So when you have these conversations with baby bats or just new goths, you don't want to just crush their dreams, just maybe educate. But like I said in the comment section, there's so many lovely conversations going on where like it's clearly young people asking this goth creator questions, and they're replying with the utmost respect, and they're just being helpful and nice. And I think that's lovely. That's really good, and it makes it this really friendly, fun environment which people will want to join in and get amongst. And that's superb. That's how you gatekeep nicely. Ethical gatekeeping, so it doesn't come completely commercialized. Yeah, that's a thing, right? It should be a thing. It's a thing. But also at the same time, let young people do things. It's important for their self-image and self-exploration to help create a well-balanced mind. Yippee. So yes, that really brings me on to my next point of like empowerment and community building. Despite like the really overwhelming rise in like the e-boy, e-girl look just stealing from the goth vibe, you know, there's like this really good community on TikTok of just like really lovely, wholesome interactions of goths helping young minds get into the goth movement, explaining cool bands for them to check out, explaining the look, explaining how they can do it. Like, this is a really genuine interaction. I listen to the music and follow the subculture, yet I'm wondering if the goth look suits blondes and blue-eyed people who can't dye their hair or get contacts. I don't know whether it'll suit me. And like this just wholesome content creator replied, of course, lots of goths have blonde hair. I have blue eyes. You just gotta see what suits you best. Like, that just makes me smile. Like, I didn't have that because obviously I was a teenager like 10 years ago. So obviously TikTok wasn't around. But like the fact that there's just these genuinely wholesome adults that are taking time out of their day to create this open, safe space to empower and to, it's like gatekeep, but also keep almost open the gate up. You're doing the opposite of gatekeeping. You're welcoming people in, but you're also explaining to them, you're teaching them the ways of goth. Honestly, stuff like that makes me so happy and makes me smile, because that's the sort of people you really need around you when you're younger. And people like that are very rare, but in the goth community, there seems to be a lot of these people, really nice, just good people that want to help you out, which is so funny, because if you take it from the stance of a normie, you might be like, oh, goth scary, or goth this theatrical character, but it's really wholesome, and it's so lovely, which really doesn't surprise me if you actually think about it, because to do all that sort of makeup and stuff, it's just this amazing craftsmanship. You're all so talented, those outfits and everything, holy smokes, it's incredible. Of course you're gonna be nice people, because the patience you would have had to do all of that stuff is phenomenal. I champion you all. And like, there's so many videos for like baby bats of like how they can get into the goth movement. There seems to be this real solidarity amongst goths, and I suppose it is because the look is so synonymous with goth. Like, it's just such this unique aesthetic, right? It's so eye-catching. So I guess it really joins them together like this army, that like unspoken tethered connection to each other. So the fact that they're showing such strength and solidarity to each other is awesome. It's really inspiring, and it shows like the goth movement isn't dead whatsoever. It's very much there. And I suppose even though, you know, there are these tough conversations being had over people saying who's a poser, who's not a poser, who's goth, who isn't goth, it's almost a good sign in a way, because it shows like healthy conversation within the community, that people really care about keeping it alive. They're all coming together, and though they might not all see eye to eye, I don't know why a triangle made sense there, and though they all might not see eye to eye, it's all for the same cause. It's all because they love the goth movement, they want to be a part of the goth movement, and they want to keep it going. The emotions are all there for the right reason, right? It's because they care. Obviously, when it comes out, then it leads to conflict, which isn't the ideal part, but I think it's, on a bigger picture, it's just a sign that all these people care, and they just want to keep the movement going and keeping it as authentic as possible, which is inherently good. It's just complex when people clash. And I think like the final point I'd like to end on is like media literacy and critical engagement. And by that I mean like encourage like goths and people, you know, to question the motives behind the like sensationalized or misinterpreted portrayals of the goth subculture. And, you know, for all of us to get amongst actively participating and shaping the narrative of goth on social media. And kind of what I mean by all of these words is like, so you see things like the I want a goth GF. Call people out for that stuff. It's weird. And also, if you do have the emotional capacity to, because I understand that like explaining things in comment sections is very draining, and sometimes when I get caught up in these dialogues with people online, I come away feeling hollow. So don't ever exhaust yourself. But if you can be like, that's not actually even goth, that's like e-girl, e-boy, you're just seeing very commercialized stereotypes of goth, and it's not even goth at all. And also, if you kind of call people out on this stuff and be like, you know, when you do make these jokes and you think it's harmless, being like, I want goth GF, she's so bad for real, sexualizing people that didn't even consent to that, it's weird, it's odd, it's creepy, it's heinous. And I understand you might be like, that's such a terminally online take, Cal, but like joking about things like this normalizes it too much, and then it actually does change people's like opinions on things. So like this is why like alternative girls in general are just so overly sexualized, and it's such a problem in the alternative community. All these alternative girls and stuff and femme presenting people have so many horror stories because they are so overly sexualized in media, and it's heinous and it's really sad. So almost as a community we need to critically think about this and call it out when we do see it happen, you know? It doesn't have to be like a big name and shame thing necessarily. Obviously it depends on what the creator of that content that said the heinous thing said. If they're just being like, I want goth GF, just be like, oh, come on, my guy. You actually just want someone to love you and put up with your bullshit. Maybe it's also like just the normalization of like, just because you are part of an alternative community that has such a strong aesthetic and look, it's also showing that like you don't always look like that. Like I know it's very big in the gym world because that's an area I'm very interested in. Fun fact, in the OG days before I did all of this, I ran a semi-successful fitness page. But like a big thing in that is like how when you're posed, you look incredible or whatever. You look, you know, you got your muscles all like popping and everything. But like when you're not posed, you just look like a normal person. Or like when you've just got a t-shirt on, you just look like a regular human. There's that like social media ready, then there's the like the reality of that world. And it would be like quite nice if you saw maybe more of the like the just because I'm a goth like this, I'm also, you know, a nurse, or I'm also a doctor, or I'm also a fireman, or I'm a librarian, and I don't always look like that. Like your totality as a goth doesn't always have to come from looking a certain way, just as it doesn't also come from having to only listen to the same music all the time. A goth can also listen to other music as well, as long as they have some sort of interest in the OG music maybe, or they're at least aware of it, you know, you would hope, I guess. And I think now I would like to conclude on the TikTokification of the goth movement again, because camera corrupted and fried my brain out. But here we are, let's get it. I think through all of this and like the TikTokification and like the goth movement being in the digital world, it's very clear to see that it has both been empowered and also challenged by all of these factors. You know, in their quest to, you know, keep this sub-movement going, for visibility, for representation, and for like still a sense of community in the digital world. I think there's been real hurdles for them to cross, but also at the same time, there's this really lovely thing going on here. TikTok has definitely provided this place for goths to, you know, express themselves, to do makeup tutorials, to show outfits, to show aesthetics, to show, you know, knowledge and history and background info about the goth movement. It's really lovely to see, and it honestly, just from the short time I've been looking at the community, does seem like a really wholesome one. Genuinely makes me smile. However, conversely, it is like really important to note that like the goth movement has been confronted with this like really genuine problem of like mainstream adoption and misinterpretation and misrepresentation. And you may be like, well, Cal, how is mainstream adoption a bad thing? And that's because like it's meant to be a sub-movement, and it does become part of the mainstream. It gets diluted down and it gets stripped away until it just becomes like this gimmick. And that's why you get jokes like, I want goth girlfriend, and all these other heinous, sad things. And that's really sad to see. It must be really tough for actual members of the OG goth community, or just members in general that are passionate about the goth movement and they love it because it feels like it represents them, and then it's just being stripped away to like this over-sexualized, gimmicky stereotype. And you know, even though TikTok has created this space where goths can interact with each other, it's also created that space where like the ego look is pushed and pushed and pushed, and it's like this very watered down, gimmicky stereotype of a goth or whatever, or just an alternative person that a normie can be like, oh, goth, at, when it's not really goth at all, which I've said like a billion times in this video. But I think it is a real genuine problem, and it's just really sad to see. And I think in general, TikTok seems to, you know, push content which is like stereotypical versions of subculture movements, because it's like the quickest ones for people to be like, oh, okay, that's that, beep bop, boop bop, boop bop. And that's tough because it means not all the voices of the goth community are being amplified, only the ones that look a certain social media ready way are. And that's a problem in itself. And I think that really does dilute the subculture's authenticity. And that's no fault of the goth movement itself, but more like social media and sub-movements evolving with the times. I suppose because of the internet it becomes a lot more globalized, so to keep hold of its core values is a real big struggle. And that's why it's good to have these conversations within the goth community of what it does mean to be goth. right? Healthy debate is good debate. But like, I really don't think it's all doom and gloom for the goth community. Much rather the opposite. I know there's always going to be disagreement on what it actually means to truly be goth. Maybe you can sit down your goth elders like Edgar Allan Poe and the writers of the books like Frankenstein and stuff, and it's just gone out of my head, which is really bad. I do know his name. I've read the book. Anyways, Bram Stoker, Dracula, yes, sorry. And get the lad from Cure who claims he's not a goth. Get them all sat down together. That'd be one hell of a podcast. But like, despite all of this challenges the goth community has faced, there's like this real sense of community and solidarity on TikTok, and it's like one of the most wholesome groups I've seen so far. Maybe I just got lucky with the content I saw, but like, it generally did seem like a lot of elder goths helping out baby bats, and that shit's wholesome as hell. I think it's ultimately just about the goth community fostering one that's like media literate and aware. So like, there's a real commitment to authenticity online, because it is such an awesome movement of self-expression. Like, it really is a cool one. And I want to really stress, by no means is the goth movement dead. I think it's going to be there forever. There's so many cool goth events going on around the world. It's not just a digital thing. It's not like you just had the one goth kid at your school. There's big things like the Whitby Goth Festival, which I've even randomly been to just because I love a side quest, and it was so interesting seeing people spend so much time on their outfits and stuff. It's amazing. I even got pictures with a couple of the like older goths just because I thought their outfits were so cool, and it really interested me. Shit like that amazes me. I love just seeing people do what they do, love what they do, get amongst it, and also just be so lovely about it. And because I always have so many questions when I meet people, and it was just they made time for my questions, and it was a really lovely conversation, really lovely environment. So if you're ever curious about these things, just get amongst it. It seems like there's lots of elder goths or just goths online that will have conversations with you in the comment sections and explain different things to you. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to go to the events. I'm not a goth at all, and I rocked up and it was cool. So yippee to goths. I understand why there's always going to be conversation about what makes goth, but I think it's all centered around the right reason, that you all care about the movement. And I think there's so much beauty in that. You care because there's so much history attached to the music. You care because there's so much history attached to the literature, and you care because there's so much history attached to the aesthetic. You're all fighting for the same thing, and so you're all only communicating your worries and concerns because of that sense of authenticity. You don't want the look to be diluted. You don't want the subculture to be diluted. It's all because you care, and that's a good thing. So let's discuss it in the comment section. What do you make of the TikTokification of the goth movement? Do you think like most people are just posers nowadays, and if you don't listen to the OG music, then you're not a goth? Or you're like, hey, no, Cal, there's nuance to it. You can like the literature, you can really like the aesthetic, but you don't have to, live and die by the music. You don't have to listen to the spooky sounds of gothcore, You may be a Taylor Swift person, or you might be an Outcast person. Hey, yeah. Or you might be a Fleetwood Mac person, or you might be an ABBA person. I once went to the ABBA experience in London. Holy smokes, ABBA's like my favourite band. We do digress though. But yeah, it's an interesting one of authenticity, and I'd really genuinely love if the goths in this community, or just goths that have stumbled across this video, could leave their thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to have a discussion with you. And I do want to stress again, I'm so sorry that if it came across disjointed from point 2, I think it was, the whole video corrupted, and it really just made me so flustered. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what did I do in this situation? So I hope it's okay, and I hope the points were good enough to at least spark conversation in the comment section. That's what this all is about, conversation. I've been your boy Cadder's Life, and a reminder, my hoodie's that I spent ages during digression, or this is meant to be the visual representation of digression, the mind, that's you, the flowers coming out, these are your ideas, and then you've got the butterfly because ideas come from ideas. And then they got the text saying the world is ours, because I think through thought and through conversation and through words and through digression and all of these lovely things, the world can be yours. It's yours to think and do with as you please. And I think there's so much beauty in that, and that's why I made this design. So the link will be here if you want to check that out and learn more about the product. And if you want to buy it, then that's cool. But if you don't, that's also cool. There'll be another video essay here. I've been your boy Cadder's Life, and I can't wait to talk to you all in the comment section. Okay, bye.